Abandoned in the scorching Sonoran Desert with empty canteens and vultures circling overhead, Amara's blistered lips formed silent prayers as her consciousness began to fade. The approaching hoofbeats could mean salvation, or the final cruel trick of a dying mind surrendering to the heat. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The Sonoran Desert stretched endlessly beneath the merciless September sun, a vast ocean of sand and stone painted in shades of amber and rust. Heat rose in visible waves from the baked earth, distorting the horizon into a shimmering mirage. In this unforgiving landscape, Amara Blackwood lay motionless, her body half buried in sand, her cracked lips parted in silent prayer for relief that wouldn't come. 3 days earlier, she had trusted the wrong men. 3 days of scorching days and freezing nights. 3 days of hope dwindling like the last drops in her canteen. They had seemed legitimate enough, guides promising safe passage through the borderlands for her research expedition. Her university credentials, expensive camera equipment, and American naivety had made her an easy mark. They'd taken everything, her gear, her documents, her money, everything except the plain gold band on her finger they'd overlooked and the thin cotton dress shoe. "You'll die out here, gringa," the leader had said, voice casual as he flung her canteen several feet away. "Nobody crosses this stretch. Too dangerous. Even the coyotes avoid it." His laugh had echoed as they drove away in her rented Jeep, leaving her with nothing but a half-full canteen in the middle of nowhere. The first day, Amara had tried to walk north, she thought, though the sun spinning overhead made directions blur like the horizon. By nightfall, her fair skin had blistered angry red and her throat burned with each swallow. The second day brought fever and confusion. She'd begun to hallucinate water pools that vanished as she approached, voices calling her name from empty arroyos. Now on the third day, she had surrendered to the sand, her body unable to fight anymore. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered to the ring, her husband's face swimming behind her closed eyelids. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd come to document the border's harshest crossing points, to photograph the journey of migrants, only to become another statistic of the desert's cruelty. Now she understood the desperation in a way no research could convey. The sound came so faintly at first that Amara believed it was another hallucination, the rhythmic crunch of hooves on sand, growing steadily louder. She lacked the strength to open her eyes, to lift her head, to call out. Her consciousness floated somewhere above her body, detached and drifting. Salvador Mendoza rode with the steady confidence of a man born to the saddle, his path following the ancient trails known only to those who belong to the desert. His dark eyes scanned the landscape continuously, reading signs invisible to outsiders. The stallion beneath him, Negro, moved with the same quiet vigilance, ears flicking forward at each new sound. Salvador had been tracking a stray from his father's ranch when he'd noticed the vultures circling. Something was dying out there, probably a coyote or jackrabbit. But Salvador knew the desert's code. He never ignored death's messengers. The desert took enough souls without human indifference adding to the toll. He adjusted his wide sombrero against the glare and guided Negro toward the circling bird. As he crested a small rise, the sun flashed off something natural in this wild place. Salvador narrowed his eyes, focusing on the strange shape half buried in sand beneath the ridge. Not animal, human, a woman. "Dios mío," he muttered, urging Negro forward at a faster pace. The vultures scattered at his approach, reluctantly yielding their claim. Salvador dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, his boots hitting sand with practiced precision as he rushed toward the still form. She was barely breathing, her skin burned an angry red where it wasn't coated with sand, her light dress offering almost no protection from the elements. American, by her features and the expensive gold band on her finger. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and even unconscious, her face was twisted in pain. Salvador knelt beside her, gently brushing sand from her cheek. "Senora, can you hear me?" No response. He reached for his canteen, dampened his bandana, and pressed it to her parched lips. The woman moaned softly, instinctively seeking the moisture. Salvador cradled her head, dribbling tiny amounts of water into her mouth, careful not to give too much at once. "Despacio, despacio," he murmured. "Slowly, you are found now." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Salvador assessed her quickly. Severe dehydration, heat stroke, exposure. She needed shelter, medical attention. The nearest hospital was in Nogales, hours away across treacherous terrain. His family's ranch was closer, perhaps 2 hours' ride, and his mother had been a curandera before arthritis claimed her hands. It was the woman's best chance. With gentle efficiency, Salvador gathered her limp body into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, dehydration having drained her already slight frame. He whispered reassurances in Spanish as he lifted her onto Negro's back, then mounted behind her, securing her body against his chest. He said to the horse, "Suave pero rapido," gentle but quick. The stallion seemed to understand the urgency, finding a smooth gait that ate up miles without jostling its fragile passenger. Salvador kept one arm wrapped around the woman's waist, his other hand on the reins, his body shielding hers from the relentless sun. Every few minutes he would stop to moisten her lips with water, watching for signs of consciousness. Amara floated in darkness, vaguely aware of motion, of arms holding her, of a voice murmuring words she couldn't understand. She was dead, she thought distantly, or dying. These sensations were just her brain's final comforting hallucinations before the end, yet the pain remained too sharp, too real. Death should hurt less, shouldn't it? Water touched her lips again, and this time Amara's instincts took over. She swallowed greedily, a small sound of desperation escaping her throat when it was withdrawn. "Easy," a voice said, the accent thick but the English clear. "Too much will make you sick, little by little, not a hallucination." Amara struggled to open her eyes, managing only narrow slits against the brightness. A silhouette loomed above her, broad-shouldered, wearing what appeared to be a wide-brimmed hat. A man's face, features indistinct against the sun behind. "Who?" she tried, but her voice cracked into painful coughing. "Salvador Mendoza," he replied, misunderstanding her question. "Rest now. We are going somewhere safe." Safe. The word penetrated Amara's fog of confusion. Safe from what? From whom? Memory returned in broken fragments. The guides, their mocking laughter, the jeep's dust cloud as they abandoned her. Fear jolted through her system, giving her a momentary burst of strength. She struggled weakly against the arms holding her. "No," she rasped. "Don't. Senora, please." The voice was gentle but firm. "You will fall. The horse is moving." Horse? Amara's limited vision registered movement, the rhythmic sway beneath her. Not a vehicle. A horse. And the man holding her wasn't one of the guides. Different voice, different build. "The men," she managed to whisper. They took everything." Salvador's jaw tightened. He'd suspected as much robbery, perhaps worse than abandonment. It happened too often in these borderlands, predators preying on the vulnerable, whether migrants or naive outsiders. "They are gone," he assured her. "You are safe with me. I'm taking you to my family's ranch. My mother will help you." Amara wanted to protest, to question, to understand, but exhaustion reclaimed her. Her head lolled against his chest as consciousness slipped away once more. Salvador adjusted his hold, ensuring she wouldn't fall, and urged Negro toward home. The terrain changed gradually as they traveled, the barren desert giving way to scattered vegetation, hardy mesquite, prickly pear, the occasional stubborn ocotillo with its crimson flowers defying the drought. Signs of life returning, of boundaries crossed. Salvador kept a vigilant watch for danger, both natural and human. Border Patrol helicopters sometimes swept these areas, and while he had nothing to hide, explanations would take precious time the woman might not have. Equally concerning were the other elements that moved through these lands: drug runners, human traffickers, desperate migrants. The borderlands belonged to everyone and no one, a place of transit and tragedy. The woman in his arms stirred occasionally, mumbling words he couldn't catch. Her fever seemed to be worsening despite his efforts to keep her cool. Salvador pressed on, knowing each minute mattered. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the Rancho Mendoza finally came into view, a cluster of adobe buildings nestled in a protected valley, surrounded by the modest green of irrigated pastures. The sight of home lifted Salvador's spirits. Negro sensed it too, quickening his pace without prompting. Figures appeared in the distance, workers returning from the fields, children playing in the relative cool of approaching evening. A woman stepped onto the porch of the main house, shielding her eyes to look toward the approaching rider. Even at this distance, Salvador recognized his mother's posture, her uncanny ability to sense when she was needed. "Mama," he whispered, more prayer than statement. "Help is coming, Senora," he told the unconscious woman. "Hold on a little longer." As Negro carried them down the final slope toward home, Salvador hoped he hadn't made a promise he couldn't keep. Esperanza Mendoza had spent 68 years reading signs in plants, animals, weather, and most especially, in people. So when she saw her youngest son approaching with a bundle cradled against his chest, she knew trouble had found him again. Salvador had always been this way, even as a boy, bringing home injured birds, stray dogs, once even a rattlesnake with a broken tail that had nearly gotten them all killed. His heart was too soft for the hardness of the borderlands, though she would never tell him so. "Mama," Salvador called as Negro carried them into the ranch yard. "Necesitamos ayuda." She was already moving, her arthritic hands signaling workers even as she called for her daughter. "Lucia, agua limpia, sabunas, medicinas." By the time Salvador reached the house, a small procession had formed Lucia with clean linens, Miguel carrying a basin of water, and young Tomas running ahead to prepare a bed. "American?" Esperanza asked as Salvador dismounted, still holding Amara. He nodded. "Found her abandoned in the desert. Robbed, I think. She's badly dehydrated. Been out there at least 2 days." Esperanza's face hardened. "Bring her inside, quickly." The main house of Rancho Mendoza was modest but cool. its thick adobe walls insulating against the desert extremes. Salvador followed his mother through the central courtyard to the small room they kept for guests, laying Amara gently on the bed Tomas had prepared. Out, Esperanza ordered the men, shooing them toward the door. Lucia and I will tend to her. Salvador hesitated. Mama, she was afraid when she woke briefly. She might panic, then you wait outside the door. If she wakes frightened, you can reassure her. But a strange man should not be present while we clean and examine her. Esperanza's tone left no room for argument. Outside in the hallway, Salvador removed his hat, running fingers through sweat-dampened hair. He should check on Negro, help with evening chores, at least wash the desert from his skin. Instead, he sank onto a wooden bench beside the door, unable to move farther. Inside the room, Esperanza and Lucia worked with practiced efficiency. They stripped away Amara's filthy dress, bathing her burning skin with cool cloths infused with herbs to draw out heat. They drizzled water mixed with honey into her mouth, coaxing her parched throat to swallow. Esperanza examined the blisters and burns covering her arms, legs, and face, applying a salve of aloe and comfrey while muttering prayers under her breath. She's very pretty underneath the burns, Lucia observed, carefully combing sand from Amara's tangled blonde hair. I wonder who she is. Someone important to someone, Esperanza replied, nodding toward the wedding ring. See how the skin beneath it is pale? She wears it always. Should we remove it? Her fingers are swelling. Esperanza considered, then shook her head. Not yet. Sometimes such things are a person's anchor when they are lost between worlds. Amara drifted through consciousness, fragments of sensation penetrating her delirium, cool hands on her burning skin, the scent of unfamiliar herbs, women's voices speaking rapid Spanish. Brief, intense pain as something was applied to her burns, then blessed numbness. She tried once to open her eyes but found only spinning darkness. Husband, she mumbled, fingers instinctively twisting her wedding band. David ... smirked she. A woman's voice soothed in accented English. Rest now. You are safe. Safe. There was that word again. Amara couldn't remember the last time she'd truly felt safe. Not since David's death ago, certainly. Not during this ill-fated research expedition. Perhaps that was why she'd come to the borderlands, because nowhere felt safe anymore, so she might as well chase danger for a purpose. Night settled over Rancho Mendoza, bringing the desert's profound silence broken only by the occasional coyote call or the soft murmur of family life from the main part of the house. Salvador remained at his post outside the Sikh room, declining dinner when Tomas brought it, accepting only coffee that grew cold beside him. Shortly before midnight, the door opened. His mother emerged, looking exhausted but satisfied. Her fever is broken, Esperanza said. I think she will live. Salvador released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Gracias a Dios. And gracias to your hands. Mama Esperanza studied her son's face in the dim hallway light. You found her just in time. Another few hours ... single quotes. She left the sentence unfinished. What happened to her? Did she say anything? She speaks, but not since. Names. Places. She called for someone named David many times. Esperanza nodded toward the bench. You should sleep. Lucia will sit with her now. Salvador shook his head. I'll stay a while longer. His mother's eyes softened. My son, always the guardian. He touched his cheek briefly, then added, if she wakes truly, remember she is injured beyond her skin. Those left to die carry wounds in their spirit. After Esperanza left, Salvador moved quietly into the room. Lucia glanced up from her chair beside the bed, then tactfully murmured something about fetching fresh water. Leaving them alone, Salvador approached the bed cautiously. In the gentle lamplight, with the desert grime washed away, the woman looked different. Younger, perhaps in her early 30s, her features delicate but somehow determined even in unconsciousness. Someone used to having her way, he guessed, but also someone who had known grief. It showed in the small line between her brows, permanent even in sleep. Her burns had been covered with Esperanza's green salve, giving her skin an otherworldly appearance. Her breathing came easier now, her chest rising and falling in the white cotton nightgown Lucia had dressed her in. Salvador remained standing, feeling suddenly like an intruder in this quiet scene. As if sensing his presence, Amara's eyelids fluttered. Salvador froze, unsure whether to retreat or stay. Her eyes opened fully this time, revealing irises of startling blue-gray like the sky before a storm. For several seconds she stared uncomprehendingly at the ceiling. Then her gaze shifted, finding him. Recognition flickered across her face, followed immediately by fear. She tried to sit up, then fell back with a gasp of pain. Easy, Salvador said softly, remaining where he stood. You're safe. This is my family's home. Amara's eyes darted around the unfamiliar room, the adobe walls, the wooden crucifix hanging beside a faded portrait of the Virgin Mary, the small window showing nothing but darkness beyond. Her breathing quickened. Where am I? What happened? Her voice was raspy but stronger than he expected. Rancho Mendoza, he answered. About 30 miles south of the border. I found you in the desert yesterday. You were ... single quotes. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. You were in a bad way. Memory visibly returned to her, her expression shifting from confusion to shame to anger. They left me to die, she whispered. Salvador nodded. The desert is not forgiving to those abandoned in it. How long have I been here? One night. My mother has been caring for you. She has the healing touch. Amara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed focus. Your mother. Is she the one who... She gestured vaguely at the salve covering her burns. Old remedies, but good ones. A silence fell between them, awkward but not entirely uncomfortable. Salvador shifted his weight, suddenly aware of his dusty clothes, his unshaven face. "Thank you," Amara said finally, her voice small but clear. "For finding me." Single quotes. Salvador inclined his head. Anyone would have done the same. No. Her certainty was startling. They wouldn't have. Another silence, heavier this time. Salvador cleared his throat. "You should rest. My sister Lucia will be back soon to sit with you." "Wait," Amara called as he turned to leave. "Your name. I remember you told me, but it's ... single quotes Salvador," he supplied. "Salvador Mendoza." "Salvador," she repeated, testing the name. "It means savior, doesn't it?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "My mother is devout. I try to live up to it. I'm Amara," she offered. "Amara Blackwood, descanso bien, Senora Blackwood," he said, moving toward the door. "Sleep well." "Amara," she corrected, her eyelids already growing heavy again. "Just Amara." Salvador paused at the threshold, watching as sleep reclaimed her. "Amara," he whispered, after her breathing had deepened. The name felt right somehow, musical on his tongue. Then he quietly closed the door, leaving her to heal in the darkness, surrounded by the protection of adobe walls and a family of strangers who had already decided she was under their care. Outside, the desert night continued its ancient cycle, coyotes hunting, owls calling, stars wheeling overhead. But within the walls of Rancho Mendoza, something new had begun, as fragile and tentative as the first green shoot after the seasonal rains. Dawn broke over Rancho Mendoza in shades of amber and rose, the light filtering through the small window of Amara's room. She woke disoriented, momentarily panicked by the unfamiliar surroundings until memory returned. The desert, the Vaquero, the kindness of strangers. She tried to sit up, wincing as her sunburned skin protested every movement. "Careful," a voice cautioned. An older woman sat in a chair beside the bed, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid, her dark eyes sharp but not unkind. "The skin must heal before the body can move freely. You must be Salvador's mother," Amara said, her voice still rough from dehydration. "Esperanza Mendoza." The woman nodded, reaching for a clay cup on the bedside table. "Drink this." Slowly, Amara accepted the cup with trembling hands. The liquid inside was cool and slightly sweet, with an herbal undertone she couldn't identify. "What is it? Aloe, honey, herbs for healing?" Esperanza watched her drink. "My grandmother taught me." Her grandmother taught her. "Thank you for taking care of me," Amara said after finishing the concoction. "I don't know how to repay." Esperanza waved away the words. "We do not help to be repaid." She stood, her movements deliberate, respectful of joints that no longer moved with ease. "I will bring food. Then we will see about clothes. Lucia's might." After Esperanza left, Amara took stock of her situation. Her burns throbbed beneath their coating of green salve, and every muscle in her body ached, but she was alive, a reality that seemed miraculous given her last memories of the desert. Her wedding ring remained on her finger, the only familiar thing in this strange new circumstance. She twisted it absently, a habit formed in the 2 years since David's death. He would never have approved of her border project, too dangerous, too politically charged. They'd argued about her assignments often during their marriage, his corporate lawyer's caution clashing with her photojournalist's need to document difficult truths. But after losing him to a sudden heart attack at 40, Amara had plunged into increasingly risky work, as if outrunning grief through exposure to others' suffering. This assignment was supposed to be her masterpiece, a photo essay documenting the treacherous journey migrants made across the border. The university grant had given her legitimacy, but it was the personal connection that drove her. David's grandmother had made that same crossing as a child in the 1940s. Amara had never appreciated the courage that took until she found herself facing the desert's indifference firsthand. Now her cameras were gone, her notes stolen, her rented Jeep presumably abandoned somewhere. She had no ID, no money, no phone. She was effectively as stranded as any of the migrants she'd come to document. Esperanza returned with a tray holding a simple breakfast of tortillas, beans, and coffee. Behind her came a younger woman, presumably Lucia, carrying folded clothes. "These should fit," Lucia said in lightly accented English, setting the clothes on the foot of the bed. She was perhaps 10 years younger than Amara, with the same sharp eyes as her mother but a more open expression. "They are work clothes, nothing fancy." "Thank you," Amara said. "Anything is better than this nightgown," Lucia smiled. "Salvador said you were American. Are you a tourist? It's strange to find Americans alone in that part of the desert." Amara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm a photojournalist. I was documenting border crossings for a university project when my guides ... turned out to be thieves." Esperanza made a soft sound of disapproval. "Those men prey on every one, migrants, journalists, even local people who wander too far. The authorities do nothing." "Do you need to contact someone?" Lucia asked. "We have a phone in the main house." Amara considered this. Her editor in Phoenix would be concerned by now, and the university would want to know what happened to their grant money and equipment. But calling meant explanations, official reports, perhaps even crossing back into the U.S. to deal with replacing her identification. Not yet, she decided. "I need to think first." After breakfast, with Lucia's help, Amara dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple cotton blouse, full skirt, and sandals. The effort exhausted her, but she insisted on leaving the bedroom, needing to see beyond its four walls. The Mendoza home revealed itself as a traditional hacienda built around a central courtyard. Bougainvillea climbed whitewashed walls and a small fountain trickled peacefully at the center. The sound of children's laughter came from somewhere nearby, mingling with the clucking of chickens and the distant lowing of cattle. Lucia helped Amara to a shaded bench in the courtyard, arranging cushions to support her still tender body. "Rest here. The air is good for healing." Left alone, Amara closed her eyes, letting the gentle sounds wash over her. For the first time since David's death, she felt something like peace, perhaps simply the result of surviving when she'd expected to die. "You're up." She opened her eyes to find Salvador standing a few feet away. In daylight, she could see him properly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that spoke of both his Spanish and indigenous heritage. His eyes, dark and serious, watched her with something between concern and curiosity. "Your mother's remedies work wonders," Amara replied, "though I suspect I look like a swamp creature with this green paste." The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "We have many lizards in the desert. You fit right in." The unexpected humor surprised a laugh from her, which quickly turned into a wince as her sunburned face protested. Salvador approached, taking a seat on a wrought-iron chair nearby. "Lucia says you're a photographer, photojournalist," Amara corrected automatically. "I document stories, not just images." "And what story were you seeking in a place where people leave others to die?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely direct. Still, it pierced something in Amara, the truth about border crossing, the human cost of migration policies. She twisted her wedding ring. "My late husband's grandmother crossed the Sonor with nothing but a water jug and a rosary when she was 12 years old." Salvador's expression softened. "You lost your husband?" "2 years ago. Heart attack." The words were mechanical now. "Practice from repetition." "Lo siento mucho," he said softly. "Those we love never truly leave us." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Amara shifted, changing the subject. "Your English is excellent. I studied in Tucson for 2 years. Agricultural science." His hands, she noticed, were strong and calloused. A worker's hands despite his education. "The ranch has been in our family for 5 generations. I came home to help preserve it." "It's beautiful," Amara said sincerely. "Peaceful." Salvador's expression turned wry. "Beauty and peace require constant work here. The desert always wants to reclaim what we've built." A small boy darted into the courtyard, skidding to a halt when he saw them. "To Sal," he called, then noticed Amara and grew suddenly shy. "This is my nephew, Mateo," Salvador explained. "My brother Miguel's youngest." "Hello, Mateo," Amara said gently. The boy ducked his head, then blurted in Spanish, "Are you the angel Tusal found in the desert?" Salvador laughed, responding in English for Amara's benefit. "Not an angel, Mateo, just a lady who was lost. Abuela says you saved her life," the boy persisted. "That makes her your responsibility now, like when you saved the hawk with the broken wing." Color touched Salvador's cheekbones. "Go help your mother, Chamaco," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Adults are talk." After Mateo ran off, Amara raised an eyebrow. "Your responsibility?" Salvador sighed. "My mother has old-fashioned ideas. In her world, saving a life creates a bond of obligation, both ways." "I see." Amara shifted uncomfortably. "I should contact the American consulate soon. I don't want to impose on your family's hospitality." "There's no hurry," Salvador said. "The nearest consulate is in Nogales, hours from here. You need to heal first." "I've lost everything," Amara admitted, the reality of her situation suddenly overwhelming. "My cameras, my notes, my identification. Months of work gone." "Not everything," Salvador corrected quietly. "You still have your life, your story. A story no one will see without photographs to prove it. Perhaps you were meant to experience the journey, not just document it." Amara bristled. "I didn't experience the journey. I was robbed and abandoned by criminals. And yet," Salvador observed, "you now know firsthand what it means to face the desert with nothing, to depend on the kindness of strangers, to lose your identity in a place where no one knows your name." His gaze held hers steadily. "Is that not what you came to understand?" The insight struck her silent. Was he right? Had she, in her determination to document others' experiences, somehow needed to live a version of it herself? The thought was both disturbing and oddly compelling. Before she could respond, Esperanza appeared in the courtyard doorway. "Salvador, Miguel needs you at the north pasture. Something with the irrigation." Salvador stood. "Rest today," he told Amara. "Tomorrow, if you feel stronger, I can show you the ranch." After he left, Amara remained in the courtyard, his words echoing in her mind. For the first time, she wondered if her border project had been less about honoring David's grandmother and more about seeking something she herself had lost, a connection to risk, to vulnerability, to the raw edge of human experience that her comfortable American life had insulated her from. As the day's heat built around her, Amara closed her eyes again, feeling the strange dual sensation of being completely lost and somehow exactly where she needed to be. 3 days passed at Rancho Mendoza, each one bringing Amara greater strength. The mysterious salves and teas from Esperanza's kitchen worked wonders on her burns, the angry red fading to tender pink, then to a deeper tan. Though still weak, she began to venture beyond the courtyard. First to the kitchen where she watched the women prepare meals, then to the small garden where Esperanza grew herbs for both cooking and healing. On the 4th morning, Amara woke before dawn, restlessness driving her from bed. She dressed in Lucia's borrowed clothes and slipped out to the porch, watching as the ranch came to life around her. Workers moved toward the barn, voices low in the pre-dawn quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster announced the coming day. "You're up early." She turned to find Salvador approaching, already dressed for work in a simple cotton shirt, worn jeans, and boots. He carried 2 steaming cups. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, accepting the coffee he offered. "Too many thoughts." Salvador leaned against the porch railing. "About going home?" "Among other things." Amara sipped the strong coffee, unsure how to express the confusion she felt. Home seemed both urgent and distant, a place she needed to return to but couldn't quite remember why. "I promised to show you the ranch," Salvador said after a comfortable silence. "Today might be good. The morning will be cool, and the doctor from the village says gentle exercise will help your recovery." "You consulted a doctor about me?" "My mother's remedies are powerful, but we thought it best. He came yesterday while you were resting." Amara felt oddly touched by this care from strangers. "I'd like to see the ranch," she said. "If you're sure I won't be in the way." An hour later, they set out on horseback, Amara on a gentle mare named Paloma, Salvador riding Negro. He'd been hesitant about her riding so soon, but Amara had insisted. 20 years of riding lessons in Connecticut proved useful as her body remembered the rhythm, though each motion still pulled at healing skin. They rode first through the cultivated fields surrounding the hacienda. Corn, beans, and squash growing in the traditional milpa system Salvador had studied in university. Workers paused to greet them, curious eyes lingering on the American woman, though no one asked questions directly. "The crops look good," Amara observed, noting the healthy green despite the harsh environment. "We use old methods with new technology," Salvador explained. "Drip irrigation to save water, companion planting to build soil. The university taught me science, but my father taught me wisdom." "Where is your father now?" Salvador's expression softened with old grief. "He died 4 years ago. Cancer. The hospitals in Nogales did what they could, but by then, ... Single quotes, he left the sentence unfinished, but Amara understood. The border didn't just separate nations, it divided access to resources, including medical care. They rode on, leaving the cultivated areas for rockier terrain where cattle grazed on sparse vegetation. Salvador pointed out landmarks as they traveled. A ridge where his great-grandfather had fought revolutionaries. A spring that never dried even in the worst droughts. Ancient petroglyphs carved into a sheltered canyon wall. "Your family has deep roots here," Amara observed. 6 generations, Salvador confirmed. Before the border was drawn, this was simply home. Not Mexico, not America, just Mendoza land. His expression turned contemplative. "The border crossed us, as they say. We did not cross it." The politics of the statement hung in the air between them, unaddressed, but acknowledged. For Salvador, the border represented an arbitrary division of what had once been whole. For Amara, it had been an abstract concept, a story to be documented, until it became the line between life and death. They reached a high point overlooking the ranch, dismounting to rest the horses. The views stretched for miles. The ranch buildings looking like toys in the distance, the patchwork of fields, and beyond, the untamed desert stretching toward the horizon. "This is what I love most," Salvador said, his voice quiet with reverence, "seeing everything as a whole. From here you can't see any borders." Amara studied his profile as he gazed out over his land, the strong jaw, the eyes that missed nothing, the set of his shoulders carrying both pride and responsibility. She'd known him less than a week, yet she felt she understood something essential about him. Salvador Mendoza was a man defined by belonging to this land, to his family, to traditions that shaped his every decision. "How did you end up studying in Tucson?" she asked. "It seems far from everything you care about." "My father insisted," Salvador replied, turning to face her. "He said we needed new knowledge to preserve old ways. The climate is changing, water is scarcer every year. Without adaptation, the ranch would die." He smiled faintly. "I hated leaving, but he was right. You could have stayed there." "After your degree, there were offers," he acknowledged, "good ones from agricultural companies. But this is home." He gestured to the expanse before them. "The land knows me, and I know it. That's worth more than any salary in Tucson." Amara felt an unexpected twist of envy. What must it be like to have such certainty, such rootedness? Her own life seemed suddenly insubstantial by comparison. A Chicago apartment filled with artifacts from her travels, but no real connections. A career built on documenting others' lives rather than living her own. "What about you?" Salvador asked. "Is photojournalism what you always wanted?" "Since I was a teenager," Amara confirmed. "I believed photographs could change the world, show people truths they couldn't ignore, and has it worked? Have your photographs changed anything?" The question wasn't challenging, merely curious, but it struck a nerve. "Sometimes," she said defensively. "My series on water contamination in Michigan helped pressure officials to replace the pipe, but often ... Single quotes, she sighed. "Often people look, feel something momentary, then turn the page." Salvador nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps change doesn't happen from one powerful image, but from many small moments of understanding, like raindrops that eventually carve canyons." The perspective surprised her. "That's a photographer's insight." "It's a farmer's insight," he corrected with a smile. "Nothing grows overnight." They remounted and continued their tour, riding along the ranch's southern boundary where a barbed wire fence marked the property line. Beyond lay more desert, but Salvador's attitude changed subtly as they approached, his posture more alert, his gaze scanning constantly. "Problem?" Amara asked, noticing the shift. "This area has seen more traffic lately," he said carefully. "People crossing. Sometimes worse?" Smugglers? Both drugs and humans? His jaw tightened. They leave people to die when they can't keep up, like they left. Amara shivered despite the growing heat of the day. You find them? Sometimes. His voice was flat, controlled. We call Border Patrol for the living, local authorities for the dead. They rode in silence for a while, the beauty of the morning tempered by this reminder of the borderland's darker realities. Eventually, Salvador guided them away from the fence line, heading toward a small stream where cottonwoods offered shade. They dismounted, letting the horses drink. Salvador pulled a canteen and small bundle of food from his saddlebag, offering to share. They sat in the dappled shade, the gurgling stream and occasional bird call the only sounds. May I ask something personal? Salvador ventured after they'd eat. Amara nodded, curious. The ring, he said, gesturing to her wedding band. You still wear it, though you said your husband died 2 years ago. Amara's hand went reflexively to the gold band. I know it's strange, she admitted. At first I wore it because the idea of taking it off was too painful. Now, single quotes, she paused, searching for words to explain something she rarely examined. Now it's like armor, I think. It keeps people at a distance. And you want that? Distance? The directness of his gaze made equivocation impossible. It's easier, she said finally. Losing David showed me how vulnerable love makes you. I'm not sure I want to risk that again. Salvador didn't respond immediately. When he did, his words were careful, measured. In the desert, vulnerability and strength are the same thing. The cactus survives because it can be wounded and still hold water. The desert tortoise lives because its shell can crack and heal again. He met her eyes. Perhaps people are the same. The insight rendered Amara momentarily speechless. How had this man she barely knew seen so clearly what she herself had been avoiding? Before she could formulate a response, Salvador stood, offering his hand to help her up. We should head back. You've been in the sun long enough for one day. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the hacienda, Amara saw a vehicle she didn't recognize parked in front, a dusty pickup truck with government plates. Salvador's posture stiffened. Border Patrol, he said, his voice neutral but his body language suddenly guarded. Wait here. He dismounted and handed Negro's reins to a ranch hand who'd appeared from the barn. Amara stayed on Paloma, watching as Salvador approached two uniformed men standing on the porch with Esperanza. Their conversation was brief, too distant for Amara to hear. She saw one officer hand Salvador a paper, saw him read it, nod, and say something in return. The officers glanced in her direction, then back to Salvador. When the officers finally departed, Salvador returned to where Amara waited, his expression troubled. What did they want? She asked. They're looking for someone, he replied carefully. Someone they think might have passed this way. A migrant? No. Salvador met her eyes directly. They're looking for you, Amara. The men who robbed you have been caught. And there are questions about what happened in the desert. The kitchen at Rancho Mendoza had become Amara's refuge in the evenings, its warmth and familiar rhythms soothing after days filled with too much uncertainty. Tonight, she sat at the worn wooden table with Salvador and Esperanza, the remains of dinner pushed aside as they discussed the Border Patrol's visit. They found my Jeep abandoned near Patagonia, Amara said, turning the paper Salvador had given her. It was a simple statement form, requesting she contact Agent Ramirez at the Nogales station regarding an ongoing investigation. And they arrested 3 men trying to sell my cameras across the border. What will you do? Salvador asked. Amara sighed, running a hand through her hair, which had begun to lighten at the ends from days under the desert sun. I should go, give a statement, identify the men if needed. It's the responsible thing. You are still healing, Esperanza pointed out. Another few days would make the journey easier. I don't think delay is wise, Salvador said, surprising both women. If you don't respond soon, they may come back with more questions about why you're still here. Amara raised an eyebrow. Is there a reason I shouldn't still be here? A shadow crossed Salvador's face. The situation at the border is complicated. American officials sometimes view Mexican citizens with suspicion if they seem to be helping someone avoid authorities. But that's not what's happening, Amara protested. Your family saved my life, see, but from their perspective, A.U.S. citizen has been staying on a ranch with a history of single quotes. He hesitated. A history of what? Amara asked. Esperanza and Salvador exchanged a look that held volumes of unspoken communication. Of helping those in need, Esperanza said finally, her voice firm, regardless of what documents they carry. Understanding dawned on Amara. The Mendoza ranch wasn't just a working farm, it was a way station of sorts, part of the invisible network that provided water, food, and temporary shelter to migrants crossing the deadly desert stretches. You help people cross the border, she stated, no judgment in her voice. No, Salvador corrected carefully. We help people who are dying in the desert. What they do afterward is not our business. It was a critical distinction, Amara realized. Not smuggling, not trafficking, humanitarian aid. The same distinction that had led to legal battles between Border Patrol and aid groups in Arizona. I don't want to create problems for your family, she said. I'll go tomorrow, clear everything up, I'll drive you, Salvador offered. The road to Nogales is not good for someone still later. Alone in her room, Amara packed the few belongings she'd accumulated. A hairbrush Lucia had given her, a shawl from Esperanza for cool evenings, the borrowed clothes now softened from washing. Such a small collection for a week that had reshaped her understanding of herself and the borderlands. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Salvador holding a battered leather portfolio. May I come in? he asked. Amara nodded, stepping back to allow him entry. He seemed hesitant, less confident than usual. "I have something for you," he said, holding out the portfolio. "For tomorrow." Curious, Amara opened it. Inside were papers, her birth certificate, her driver's license, her passport. She looked up in shock. "How did you get these?" "The thieves took everything. They took your bag, your wallet," Salvador corrected. "Not everything. These were in your Jeep. Border Patrol recovered them, but with the investigation ongoing, single quotes," he shrugged. "A friend at the station owed me a favor." Amara stared at the documents, then back at Salvador. "You could get in trouble for this. Only if you tell them where you got them," he replied with a small smile. "Which I trust you won't. Why risk it?" Salvador was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Because sometimes the system protects rules more than people. You deserve to face tomorrow with your identity intact." The gesture moved Amara deeply, not just the practical help, but the understanding behind it. Salvador recognized what it meant for her to reclaim these small tokens of who she was. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing more elaborate words would only embarrass him. He nodded, then turned to leave, pausing at the door. "We leave at dawn. The drive takes 4 hours, longer if the checkpoint is busy." "Salvador," she called as he stepped into the hallway. "Will you be in trouble? For finding me, bringing me here?" His expression softened. "No. Helping injured Americans is still allowed, thank God." The wry twist of his mouth revealed layers of political commentary in that simple statement. After he left, Amara sat on the bed, passport in hand, tracing her own image on its pages. The woman in that photo seemed like a stranger, now confident, viewing the border as a subject rather than a reality. She'd crossed into Mexico legally with privilege and purpose, never imagining she'd experience the borderlands as so many others did, vulnerable, dependent on the mercy of strangers, her very identity in question. Dawn arrived with the scent of brewing coffee and the soft sounds of a household stirring to life. Amara, dressed in her cleanest borrowed outfit, secured her hair in a practical braid and joined Salvador by his truck hand, aging Ford that had clearly seen hard service on Ranch Road. The goodbyes were brief but warm. Esperanza pressed a package of food into her hands. Lucia hugged her with surprising emotion. "You will come back to visit, yes?" the younger woman asked. "When everything is settled?" "I'd like that," Amara replied, surprised to realize she meant it. The first hour of the drive passed in comfortable silence, the landscape shifting around them as they left the ranch behind. Salvador drove with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, his hands relaxed on the wheel, eyes constantly scanning the road ahead. "Will you continue your project?" he asked eventually. "About the border crossings?" Amara gazed out at the passing desert. "I don't know. My equipment is evidence now. The grant period is nearly over. And honestly, I'm not sure I can see it the same way anymore." "How do you see it now?" She considered the question carefully. "Less abstractly, less politically, maybe. Before it was about policies and statistics, numbers of crossings, death rates, enforcement strategies." She twisted her wedding ring, a habit Salvador had surely noticed by now. "Now I see faces. Your mother's hands healing me. The risk you took bringing a stranger home." Salvador nodded. "The border is not a line on a map. It's stories. Lives interrupted, including yours," Amara observed. "Your family's land divided by politics. We adapt," he said simply, "like the desert plants after a fire. New growth from old roots." They lapsed into silence again. It was a different quality than before, expectant, as if both were aware of approaching a turning point. The Border Patrol checkpoint appeared on the horizon, a collection of temporary buildings and vehicles straddling the road. Salvador slowed, his posture subtly changing back straighter, hands positioned precisely at 10 and 2 on the wheel. Expression neutral. "Let me do the talking," he said quietly. "Agent Torres is working today." "He's reasonable." Amara nodded, suddenly nervous, though she had nothing to hide. She watched Salvador's transformation with new understanding. This careful self-modulation was a survival skill in a place where one's appearance and accent could determine treatment. The agent who approached their vehicle was middle-aged, with the weathered face of someone who spent days in the sun. His eyes flickered with recognition when he saw Salvador. "Mendoza," he said, tone professional but not unfriendly. "What brings you north today?" "Taking my friend to the station in Nogales," Salvador replied. "She needs to speak with Agent Ramirez about the robbery last week." Torres leaned down, looking at Amara with increased interest. "You're the photographer they found the cameras from? The one who disappeared?" "I didn't disappear," Amara clarified. "I was left in the desert to die. Salvador found me." Torres's expression shifted subtly. "Lucky coincidence, God's will," Salvador countered smoothly. "It was near death on my property." The agent studied them both, then straight pull over to the secondary inspection area. "I need to call this in." 20 tense minutes later, they were cleared to continue. But the encounter left a chill that the morning heat couldn't dispel. As they drove away from the checkpoint, Amara noticed Salvador's hands were tight on the wheel, his knuckles white. "That happens often?" she asked quietly. "Often enough," he replied. "It's to me, to my workers, to anyone with brown skin and a Spanish name." He visibly relaxed his grip. "I'm sorry you had to see it." "I'm not," Amara said firmly. "It's part of the truth I came to understand." Salvador glanced at her, something warming in his expression. "You see clearly now." "Not everything," she admitted, "but more than before." They reached Nogales by mid-morning, the border town bustling with activity. Shoppers crossing from the American side for cheaper goods, workers heading north with day permits, tourists sampling street food and browsing colorful markets. Salvador parked near the Border Patrol station, a utilitarian building that seemed to radiate authority. He turned to Amara, his expression serious. What will you say happened? She understood the question behind the question. Would she mention the Mendoza ranch, the days of recovery, the help she'd received? The truth, she said, that I was robbed and abandoned, that I was rescued by a rancher who found me nearly dead on his property, that his family nursed me back to health. She held his gaze. Nothing more specific unless directly asked. He nodded, satisfied. I'll wait here. No, Amara said, surprising herself with her certainty. Come with me, please. I may need a friend. Something shifted in Salvador's expression, subtle but unmistakable. The word friend hung between them, simultaneously true and inadequate. Of course, he said, finally reaching for his hat. Whatever you need. The border patrol station hummed with the controlled chaos of a facility perpetually understaffed and overworked. Fluorescent lights cast everyone in the same unflattering pallor, making the divide between agents and civilians even starker. Those with badges moved with purpose, while those without waited with the resigned patience of the powerless. Amara approached the front desk with Salvador a half step behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. The receptionist looked up with practiced disinterest. I'm here to see Agent Ramirez, Amara said, sliding the form across the counter. About the robbery case. Interest flickered in the receptionist's eyes. She picked up a phone, murmured something, then nodded. Please take a seat. He'll be with you shortly. The waiting area held an eclectic mix of people, a few anxious-looking families probably dealing with immigration issues, a couple of ranchers similar to Salvador in dress, though their expressions were more hostile, and several official-looking individuals with briefcases and harried expression. You didn't need to come, Amara said softly to Salvador, aware of how his presence might be perceived. I could have managed, I know you could, he replied, his voice equally low. But you asked. That simple statement silenced her. When had she last allowed herself to ask for support? Somewhere after David's death, she'd embraced self-sufficiency as a shield, confusing independence with isolation. Senora Blackwood? A voice interrupted her thoughts. A man in the Border Patrol uniform stood before them, mid-40s with the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. I'm Agent Ramirez. Please come with me. He nodded to Salvador without surprise, suggesting he'd been briefed about their arrival together. The interview room was Spartan. A table, 3 chairs, a window with blinds closed against the desert sun, and a camera in the corner recording everything. Ramirez gestured for them to sit, then took the chair opposite. First, I'm glad to see you're okay, Mrs. Blackwood, he began, his tone professional but not unkind. When your rental company reported the Jeep abandoned and your hotel said you never returned, we feared the worst. Thank you, Amara replied. I was lucky. Ramirez glanced at Salvador. Very lucky. Mr. Mendoza's ranch is quite isolated. The subtle emphasis wasn't lost on either of them. Salvador's face remained impassive, but Amara sensed his tension. I understand you have my cameras, she said, steering the conversation to safer ground. And you've arrested the men who robbed me. 3 of them, yes. Ramirez pulled a file from his briefcase. Juan Diaz, Ernesto Vargas, and Miguel Fuentes. They were trying to sell your equipment in Guaprita. Very expensive cameras. Part of my work. I'm a photojournalist, so I've learned. Ramirez opened the file, revealing printouts of her website and credentials, covering the migrant crisis according to your university grant. That's right. And these men were your guides? I hired them in Nogales, Amara explained. They came recommended by someone at my hotel. She paused, remembering her naivety with a pang of embarrassment. I should have verified their credentials better. They're known to us, Ramirez said neutrally. Small-time predators who target foreigners. Unfortunately common for the next hour. Amara recounted her experience in detail, the initial days of the expedition, how the men had suddenly turned on her, taking her equipment and abandonment in the desert. Ramirez took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she described Salvador finding her, the agent's interest visibly sharpened. And how exactly did you come across Miss Blackwood, Mr. Mendoza? He asked, turning his attention to Salvador for the first time. I was tracking a stray from our herd, Salvador replied evenly. I saw vultures circling and went to investigate. Quite a coincidence. God's mercy, Salvador countered, the same response he'd given at the checkpoint. Ramirez studied him for a moment, then returned to Amara. The men we arrested claim you were collaborating with them to document illegal crossings, that you paid them to introduce you to smugglers. Amara's shock must have shown on her face. That's absurd. I was documenting legal crossing points, interviewing border officials and humanitarian workers. Everything was above board. Check my grant paperwork, my university credentials. We have, Ramirez assured her. Your story seems more credible than theirs. They're obviously trying to reduce their charges. He closed the file. Still, I have to ask, in your time on the Mendoza ranch, did you witness anything suspicious? Any activity that might suggest involvement with human trafficking or smuggling? The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Ramirez was fishing, using her case to pursue a longer-standing interest in the Mendoza family. Amara met Salvador's eyes briefly, then looked directly at the agent. The only activity I witnessed was extraordinary kindness toward a stranger in need, she said firmly. Salvador and his family saved my life, nursed me back to health, and brought me here today to help your investigation. If that's suspicious, then I don't understand law enforcement priority. Her voice had risen slightly with emotion. Ramirez had the grace to look momentarily abashed. Just routine questions, Mrs. Blackwood. He shuffled papers, changing tack. Your equipment is in evidence until the case concludes, which could take months. However, we can release it to you early if you're willing to provide testimony now and sign a statement. Of course, Amara agreed. I want these men prosecuted. The formalities took another hour, signing statements, identifying photos of the men and her equipment, providing contact information for follow-up. Throughout, Salvador remained a silent presence, offering support without interference. Finally, Ramirez stood. Your cameras and equipment will be released to you tomorrow. We'll need you to sign final paperwork. After that, you're free to return to the States. The statement was both a question and an assumption. Why wouldn't she return immediately? What reason could she have to stay? Thank you, Agent Ramirez, Amara said, rising as well. I appreciate your help. Outside, the midday heat hit them like a physical force. Amara squinted against the brightness, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. The interview had taken more from her than she'd realized. Are you hungry? Salvador asked, noting her pallor. There's a good place near the plaza. The restaurant was a small family operation, its patio shaded by grapevines heavy with fruit. Salvador ordered for both of them in rapid Spanish, then turned to Amara with concern. You defended my family in there, he said quietly. Thank you. Amara shook her head. I told the truth, nothing more. You could have distanced yourself from us. It might have been smarter. Smarter, maybe. But not right. She took a sip of the water the waiter had brought. Have they always suspected your family of smuggling? Salvador considered his words carefully. The Mendoza Ranch has existed longer than the Border Patrol, longer than the border itself. We have a different view of the land and who belongs on it. He traced a pattern on the tablecloth. My grandfather once told me no human being is illegal on land that was stolen in the first place. The statement hung between them. Honest but dangerous. In another context, with another person, Salvador might never have revealed such thoughts. I understand, Amara said softly, and I respect your family's principle. Their food arrived enchiladas for Salvador, a lighter soup for Amara, whose appetite was still recovering. They ate in companionable silence, the sounds of the busy plaza providing backdrop. Ramirez said I could go back tomorrow, Amara said finally, addressing the question that had been growing since they left the station. After I collect my equipment, Salvador nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Your editor must be worried. And the university? Yes. Amara stirred her soup. I should call them. Let them know I'm all right. There's a phone at the hotel where we'll stay tonight. International calls are possible. The practicality of the statement grounded Amara. One night in Nogales, then decisions. Return to her life in Chicago with its deadlines and lonely apartment, or Salvador, she began, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. These past days at your ranch have been your recovery, he finished for her, his tone gentle but firm. Nothing more should be decided until you are home, safe in your own life. The kindness of his interruption struck Amara deeply. He was offering her space, freedom from emotional decisions made in the vulnerability of trauma and rescue. You're right, she said, managing a small smile. One step at a time. After lunch, they walked through the colorful streets of Nogales. Salvador needed supplies for the ranch, and Amara found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of movement without urgency, of seeing the border town as a living community rather than a subject for documentation. In a small shop selling handcrafted goods, Salvador paused before a display of silver jewelry. With careful deliberation, he selected a bracelet, a simple design of intertwined silver strands with a small turquoise stone. For your sister? Amara asked, watching the shopkeeper wrap. Salvador shook his head. A reminder, he said cryptically, tucking the package into his pocket. They found a modest hotel near the center of town, clean and comfortable if not luxurious. Salvador arranged 2 rooms, handling the transaction with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. Rest, he advised Amara, handing her the key to her room. Tomorrow will be another long day. She nodded, suddenly exhausted as the emotional weight of the day caught up with her. Yet as she watched Salvador head toward his own room, a strange reluctance filled her. A sense of time slipping away, of words unspoken, possibilities unexplored. Salvador, she called impulsively. He turned, waiting. Thank you for everything. I don't think I've said that properly yet. His expression soft. No need for thanks between friends, he said, the word carrying new weight after her use of it earlier. Descansbean, Amara. In her room, Amara sat on the edge of the bed, turning her wedding ring slowly. For the first time in 2 years, she slipped it off, holding it in her palm, examining the slight indentation it had left on her finger. Not removing it entirely, not yet, but considering the possibility that one day she might be ready, that perhaps her armor had served its purpose and it was time to risk vulnerability again. Outside her window, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting Nogales in shades of gold and amber that reminded her of the desert where she had nearly died and where something new had begun to live. Morning arrived with the cacophony of a border town awakening, vendors setting up stalls, cars honking in the growing traffic, the distant calls of children heading to school. Amara woke feeling strangely liberated, as if the interview with Border Patrol had relieved her of a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged. She dressed in her borrowed clothes for what might be the last time, tucking her wedding ring into the pocket of Lucia's skirt rather than returning it to her finger. A small gesture, private and tentative, but significant nonetheless. Salvador was waiting in the hotel lobby, hat in hand, freshly shaven. He looked different in the morning light, more approachable, less the stoic Vaquero who had found her in the desert. Slept well? He asked, noting the new energy in her movements. Better than I expected, Amara admitted. Ready to face Agent Ramirez again? Salvador smiled faintly. He's not so bad. Just a man caught between duty and reality. The observation surprised Amara with its generosity. You're very forgiving towards someone who clearly suspects your family. Bitterness is a luxury, Salvador replied simply. My father taught me that. The border patrol station seemed less intimidating in the morning. They were expected, and Agent Ramirez himself met them at the front desk. Your equipment is ready, Mrs. Blackwood, he said, leading them to a processing room. We've documented everything for evidence, but we need you to verify it's all accounted for. 3 large evidence boxes sat on a table, tagged and cataloged with meticulous detail. Amara felt a surge of emotion as she opened the first box to find her primary camera, a high-end Canon that had been an investment in her career. Paid for with her first major assignment payment. She lifted it carefully, checking for damage. Apart from some desert dust and a few new scratches, it seemed intact. The memory cards? She asked, suddenly concerned about the images she'd already captured before the robbery. All here, Ramirez confirmed, pointing to a smaller evidence bag. Though our technicians had to access them as part of the investigation course, Amara understood the necessity. Though the thought of strangers viewing her work without context bothered her, the inventory took nearly an hour. Most of her equipment had survived intact, though her laptop was missing, likely sold before the arrests. Ramirez provided the necessary paperwork, which Amara signed with relief. One last thing, the agent said, handing her a business card. The prosecutor may need additional testimony if this goes to trial. Are you planning to return to Mexico for that? The question highlighted a practical reality Amara hadn't considered. Her involvement with this case wasn't over simply because she had her equipment back. I'm not sure of my plans yet, she admitted. But yes, I'll return if needed. Good. Ramirez nodded, then surprised her by adding, be careful crossing back. The checkpoint agents have been instructed to give you priority. But there's still paperwork. I'm not crossing today, Amara said without thinking. I need to ... single quotes. She glanced at Salvador, who kept his expression carefully neutral. I have more work to do here first. If Ramirez found this suspicious, he didn't show it, of course. The university project. Just keep your papers in order. Outside, Salvador helped load the equipment into his truck, neither commenting on her spontaneous declaration nor asking questions. This acceptance, Amara realized, was part of what drew her to him, his willingness to let moments unfold without forcing definitions. I should call my editor, she said as they pulled away from the station. And the university. Is there somewhere with a reliable phone? Salvador nodded. The hotel has international service, or there's a communication center near the plaza with better rates. They opted for the latter, a small storefront offering phone booths with surprising privacy. Amara entered one with a growing sense of trepidation. These calls would reconnect her to a life that suddenly felt distant, almost theoretical compared to the visceral reality of the past week. Her editor answered on the second ring. Phoenix Journal, Harris speak. Jack, it's Amara Blackwood. A beat of stunned silence, then explosive relief. Amara, Jesus Christ. Where have you been? We filed a missing persons report 3 days ago. Amara winced, imagining the worry she'd caused. I'm sorry, Jack, I was robbed on assignment. Left in the desert. I've been recovering with a family who found me. Are you okay? Where are you now? His questions came rapid-fire, journalistic instinct battling with personal concern. I'm fine. In Nogales, I just got my equipment back from Border Patrol. She hesitated, then added, the men who robbed me were arrested, thank God. Jack's relief was palpable even through the phone line. When are you coming back? The university's been calling daily and your sister's frantic. Her sister. Amara closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. Melissa was the only family she had left after David's death, and they'd grown closer in their shared grief. Tell everyone I'm safe, she said, but I'm not coming back yet. The story isn't finished. The story? Jack's tone shifted from relief to disbelief. Amara, you nearly died out there. Exactly, she said, suddenly certain. That's part of the story now. My story. I need to finish what I started, but from a new angle. What new angle? The human one, she replied. Not just policies and statistics. Real people on both sides of the border, including those who help migrants survive the crossing. There was a pregnant pause. That sounds like a different project, Jack said cautiously, one with legal implications. The university grant was specific about focusing on official crossings and policies. I know, I'll call them next. But Jack, this is important. Amara struggled to articulate the transformation in her perspective. I experienced firsthand what thousands go through. I can tell a story no one else can. Another silence, then a reluctant sigh. You always were stubborn. His tone softened. Just be careful, and call your sister before she flies down there herself. After promising regular check-ins, Amara hung up and dialed the university's research office. That conversation was more complicated, requiring careful explanation of how her project's focus had evolved while still meeting grant requirements. The administrator was skeptical but agreed to forward her revised proposal to the committee. Her final call was to Melissa, the hardest of all. Her sister alternated between tears of relief and anger at Amara's recklessness. I told you this assignment was too dangerous, Melissa scolded her voice breaking. After David, I can't lose you too. You won't, Amara promised, her own eyes damp. I'm being careful now. I have people looking out for me. People? What people? Melissa's suspicion was immediate. The family that saved me. They've been incredibly kind, and you trust them? Complete strangers in a foreign country? Amara thought of Salvador waiting patiently outside, of Esperanza's healing hands, of Lucia's easy friendship. Yes, she said with certainty. I trust them completely. When she emerged from the phone booth, Salvador was leaning against his truck, expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. Amara approached slowly, aware that something had shifted inside her during those calls. A recommitment to her work, but with new purpose and perspective. Everything okay? He asked. Better than okay, she replied. I've decided to stay. To complete my project, but differently now. Salvador nodded, neither surprised nor questioned. What do you need? The simplicity of his response moved her. No debate, no caution, just acceptance and support. To return to the ranch, if that's possible, she said. To document what I experienced, what your family does. The real human story of the borderlands. Salvador removed his sunglasses, meeting her gaze directly. That kind of documentation could bring attention we don't seek. I know, Amara acknowledged. I would be careful. Change names, locations, protect your family's privacy while still telling the truth. And afterward? When the story is told, the question hung between them, layered with meanings neither was ready to fully articulate. After her project, after her time at the ranch, after this unexpected intersection of their lives. I don't know, she admitted, but I'd like the chance to find out. Salvador studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and withdrew the small package from the shop the day before. He handed it to Amara. I bought this yesterday, he said. It seemed right. Amara unwrapped the silver bracelet with its turquoise stone. In the sunlight, the metal gleamed with subtle patterns that reminded her of water flowing over desert rock. It's beautiful, she said, genuinely touched. But why? In my culture, turquoise represents strength, protection, and healing, Salvador explained. I thought you might need all three. Amara slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, the cool metal warming instantly against her skin. The simple gift felt significant, not romantic exactly, but personal in a way that acknowledged the connection forming between them. Thank you, she said softly, for this, for everything. Salvador held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded toward the truck. We should go. It's a long drive back, and Miguel will need help with the evening chores. The casual reference to ranch routine, the assumption that she would be part of it, filled Amara with unexpected contentment. As they drove away from Nogales, the border town receding in the rearview mirror, she felt herself crossing a different kind of boundary, one between her past self and who she might become. Tell me about your father, she said, settling into the passenger seat. You mentioned he taught you about forgiveness. Salvador's expression softened with memory. He was a complicated man, fierce in his principles but gentle in his judgments. He glanced at her, like someone else I'm coming to know. The comparison warmed Amara. As Salvador began to share stories of his father, the desert landscape rolled past, harsh and beautiful in equal measure, just like life itself, she thought, just like the unexpected journey that had brought her here to this truck with this man, traveling away from what she had known towards something she was only beginning to understand. The Mendoza family welcomed Amara's return with a warmth that surprised her. Esperanza embraced her as if she'd been gone months rather than days, while Lucia immediately began asking questions about Nogales and the border patrol. The children ran circles around her, excited by the large cases of equipment, which Miguel and Salvador carried to the small room that had become hers. You look different, Esperanza observed that evening as they prepared dinner together, Amara now insisting on helping rather than being treated as a guest. Different how? Amara asked, slicing tomatoes with careful precision. The older woman studied her with knowing eyes, more present. Before, part of you was still lost in the desert. The insight was startling in its accuracy. Amara had felt fractured since her rescue, grateful but disoriented, alive but unmoored. Now, having faced the authorities and made conscious decisions about her path forward, she felt a new integration of purpose and identity. I've decided to stay, Amara explained, to document life here with your permission. The real story of the borderlands, not just the politics. Esperanza's hands paused briefly in their work of shaping tortillas. And Salvador knows this? Yes, he said it would be my decision, and yours. The older woman nodded thoughtfully. Some stories need telling, even when there is risk in the telling. She returned to her tortillas, but changed names, changed the ranch. Some truths live better in shadows. Over the next days, Amara established a new routine at Rancho Mendoza. Mornings were for helping with chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, tending the garden with Esperanza. She insisted on contributing, aware that her presence added to the family's workload and expenses. Afternoons were for her project. She photographed everything, the daily rituals of ranch life, the harsh beauty of the surrounding landscape, the faces of those who called this place home. Through her lens, the borderlands revealed themselves not as a political abstraction, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of human connection. Salvador often accompanied her on these photographic expeditions, guiding her to places of particular significance, a hidden spring that never ran dry, ancient petroglyphs carved into canyon walls, the graves of ancestors who had lived on this land long before borders existed. My great-grandmother is buried here, he explained one afternoon, showing her a small family cemetery nestled against a hillside. She was Apache, married my great-grandfather after his first wife died in childbirth. Amara photographed the modest stone markers, weathered by time but still standing against the elements. Your family history contains multitudes, she observed. Like the border itself, Salvador agreed. Nothing is simple here, not blood, not loyalty, not belonging. As the days passed, Amara found herself increasingly drawn to Salvador, not just his physical presence, though that affected her more than she cared to admit, but his complex understanding of his place in the world. He moved through life with a certainty she envied, a rootedness that both attracted and intimidated her. One evening, after a long day photographing the ranch's southern boundary, they paused to rest on a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast expanse of desert. The setting sun painted everything in shades of crimson and gold, turning the harsh landscape into something almost otherworldly. I never thought I'd find beauty in a place that nearly killed, Amara mused, adjusting her camera for one final shot. The desert doesn't try to kill or save, Salvador replied. It simply is. We project our fears and hopes onto it. Amara lowered her camera, struck by the philosophical bent of his words. Is that how you see the border too? Just a human projection? The border is different, he said after a moment's reflection. It's an imaginary line given power through belief like money or religion. His expression turned thoughtful. But the consequences are real enough. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, the day's heat gradually yielding to evening's cool embrace. As they approached the hacienda, however, Amara noticed something unusual. A vehicle she didn't recognize parked in front. Salvador tensed, almost imperceptibly. Border Patrol, he murmured, though this wasn't the same official truck they'd seen before. Inside, they found Agent Ramirez seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee before him, engaged in what appeared to be polite conversation with Esperanza. He rose when they entered. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Mendoza, he greeted them. Sorry for the unannounced visit. What brings you here, Agent Ramirez? Salvador asked, his tone careful. Partially good news, Ramirez replied. The men who attacked Messrs. Blackwood have accepted a plea deal. They'll serve time for robbery and attempted murder. No trial necessary. Relief washed over Amara. That's good to hear. However, Ramirez continued, his expression turning more serious. There's another matter. We've received reports of increased activity in this area. Unauthorized crossings, specifically. The kitchen fell silent. Esperanza remained at the stove, her back to the room, but Amara could see the tension in her shoulders. The usual seasonal patterns, Salvador said evenly. The heat pushes people to more remote crossings, despite the danger. Perhaps. Ramirez studied him. But our sources suggest something more organized. Possibly a new smuggling route. And you think we're involved? Salvador's question was direct, without defensiveness. Ramirez sighed. Officially, I'm here to warn all ranchers in the area to report suspicious activity. Unofficially, ... single quotes. He glanced at Amara, then back to Salvador. I respect your family, Salvador. Your father was a good man. But times are changing. Enforcement is tightening. The consequences for certain humanitarian activities are more severe than they used to be. The warning was clear, delivered with as much delicacy as possible under the circumstances. I appreciate your concern, Salvador replied. We'll keep our eyes open. After Ramirez left, a heavy silence hung in the kitchen. Esperanza muttered a prayer under her breath, while Salvador stared out the window, his expression unreadable. He suspects something specific, Amara said finally. Doesn't he? Salvador turned to face her. 2 nights ago, while you were in Nogales, we helped a family. Mother, father, 2 small children. They had been abandoned by their guide, similar to your situation, but worse. The youngest was severely dehydrated. Where are they now? Safe, Esperanza interjected firmly. That's all you need to know. Amara recognized the wisdom in this. The less detail she had, the less she could inadvertently reveal. Later that night, unable to sleep, Amara sat in the courtyard reviewing the day's photographs on her camera's display screen. The images were good, technically proficient, but also imbued with something deeper, a connection to the subject that her previous work had sometimes lacked. May I see? She looked up to find Salvador standing in the courtyard entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. Of course, she said, making room for him on the bench. He sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, and she handed him the camera. Salvador studied each image with careful attention, taking his time, occasionally nodding or murmuring appreciation. You see, with both eyes and heart, he said finally, returning the camera. Not everyone does. Thank you. The compliment meant more coming from him than from any editor or critic she'd encountered in her career. Ramirez's visit troubles you, Salvador observed. Not a question, but a statement. Amara considered denying it, then decided on honesty. Not for the reasons you might think. I'm not afraid for myself. For us, then, yes. She met his gaze in the dim courtyard light. I don't want my presence here to bring scrutiny to your family, especially if you're helping people. We do what conscience demands, Salvador said simply, as we have for generations. Ramirez knows this, just as we know he must do his job. An unspoken understanding, Amara mused. Until recently, the politics change, the pressures increase. He sighed. The world beyond our fences grows more complicated each year. impulsively. Amara reached for his hand, her fingers lightly touching his. "Tell me honestly, am I putting your family at risk by staying? By documenting life here?" Salvador turned his hand to clasp hers properly, the contact sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Life involves risk, Amara. The question is whether the purpose justifies it." His eyes held hers. "Does your work have purpose?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "More now than ever." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then stay." They sat in silence, hands still joined, the simple contact communicating more than words could express. Around them, the night sounds of the ranch created a cocoon of normal secrets chirping. Distant coyote call, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "I never thanked you properly," Amara said finally. "Not just for saving my life, but for showing me a different way to see." Salvador's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "You've shown me things too," he admitted, then illuminating. "Seeing my world through your eyes." The confession hung between them, intimate and honest. Amara became acutely aware of his proximity, of the calluses on his palm against her softer skin, of the way his presence seemed to fill the courtyard despite his quiet demeanor. Slowly, as if giving her every opportunity to pull away, Salvador raised his free hand to her face, fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was questioning, tentative. Amara leaned into his hand, answering the unspoken query. For a suspended moment they remained thus connected yet hesitant, balanced on the edge of something neither had planned. Then Salvador leaned forward and kissed her, so softly it might have been the desert breeze. Amara closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel without analysis or reservation. His lips were warm and certain against hers, neither demanding nor apologetic. When they separated, Salvador's expression held a mixture of wonder and caution. "I didn't plan that," he said softly. "Neither did I," Amara replied, equally quiet. "But I'm not sorry, nor I." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "But there should be no rush, no pressure. You're still healing in more ways than one." The consideration in his words touched her deeply. Unlike so many men she'd known, Salvador understood that emotional wounds required as much respect as physical ones. "Thank you," she whispered, resting her forehead against his. "For everything." That night, Amara slept with her wedding ring on the small table beside her bed rather than under her pillow where she'd kept it since removing it. A small change, perhaps insignificant to anyone else, but to her it represented a conscious step forward. Not abandoning the past, but creating space for whatever might come next. 2 weeks had transformed Amara's project into something far richer than she had originally envisioned. Her photographs captured not just the harsh realities of the borderlands, but the resilience of those who called it home. Each image told a story. Salvador mending fences at dawn, his silhouette stark against the rising sun. Esperanza's hands preparing medicinal herbs, wisdom in every practiced movement. Children playing in the courtyard, their laughter a defiant counterpoint to the hardships surrounding them. The morning after their kiss in the courtyard, Amara had worried about awkwardness, but Salvador had approached their evolving relationship with the same quiet respect he showed everything else in his life. There were no grand declarations or dramatic changes, just subtle shifts in their interactions. Fingers that lingered when passing items at breakfast, shared glances across the dinner table, conversations that stretched late into the evening. "Your work is changing," Salvador observed one afternoon as Amara sorted through printed photographs spread across the kitchen table. She'd made a trip to Nogales to have select images developed, wanting to see them properly rather than just on her camera's small screen. "How so?" Amara asked, curious about his perception. Salvador picked up an image of an elderly ranch hand teaching a young boy to rope. "Your earlier photographs, the ones from before they observed from a distance. These ... he gestured to the new collection. "These participate. They're inside the moment." His insight struck Amara deeply. Her previous work had been technically excellent, but emotionally detached. The perspective of a witness rather than a participant. These new images reflected her integration into the life she was documenting. "I'm not just passing through anymore," she admitted. "I care about what happens here, Dot." Salvador's eyes met hers, understanding the layers in her statement. "That changes everything, doesn't it?" It did. Amara's phone calls with her editor had become increasingly complex as Jack struggled to reconcile her evolving vision with the magazine's expectations. The university was similarly concerned about the shift in focus from policy documentation to human narrative. They want statistics, policy analysis, official statements. Amara explained to Salvador later that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in deepening shades of purple and gold. "They're uncomfortable with the personal dimension." "Of course they are," Salvador replied. "Numbers are safe. Stories are dangerous, especially stories that might make people question what they've been told about the border." Amara nodded, turning her turquoise bracelet thoughtfully. "My sister's coming next week. She wants to see for herself that I'm okay." Salvador raised an eyebrow. "Is that good or bad?" "Both. Melissa is protective, especially since David died." Amara sighed. "She won't understand why I'm still here." "Why this matters so much, then we'll help her understand," Salvador said simply, as if the solution were obvious. His quiet confidence both comforted and challenged Amara. Throughout her career, she'd fought her battles alone, against skeptical editors, resistant subjects, her husband's concerns about dangerous assignments. The idea of facing difficulties with someone beside her was both foreign and deeply appealing. 3 days later, a new complication arose. Salvador returned from town with news that chilled the peaceful atmosphere they'd established. A family was detained crossing the border 10 miles north of here, he reported during dinner. They had photographs of Rancho Mendoza, said someone told them it was a safe place. Esperanza crossed herself, murmuring a prayer. Were they harmed? No, but they were interrogated extensively about who helped them. Salvador's expression was grim. They didn't know names, but they described the ranch. Ramirez? Mara asked, thinking of the agent's recent warning. Salvador shook his head. Different team, more aggressive. They've increased patrols in this area. The implications hung heavily over the table. Increased scrutiny meant increased risks, not just for the Mendoza families, humanitarian activities, but for anyone associated with them, including Amara. Later that night, she found Salvador in the barn, brushing Negro with methodical strokes that spoke more of seeking calm than necessity. "This is my fault," she said, leaning against the stall door. "My presence here has drawn attention." Salvador continued brushing, his movements uninterrupted. "No, this pattern was established long before you arrived. Politics are shifting. Enforcement is tightening everywhere along the border. Still, I've added complications." Amara entered the stall, moving beside him. "I don't want to be the reason your family faces trouble." Salvador set the brush aside and turned to face her. In the lantern light, his features were half in shadow, making him look both vulnerable and formidable. "Amara," he said softly, "trouble finds those who stand for something. Always. Question is whether what we stand for is worth the risk, and is it for your family, for you?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture now familiar but still thrilling. "Some principles transcend borders. The worth of human life, the obligation to help those in need." His thumb traced her lower lip, the courage to recognize love when it appears unexpectedly. The word hung between them, neither rushing to define or contain it. "I'm still figuring out who I am now," Amara admitted. "After David, after the desert, after meeting you." "I know," Salvador replied, "and I have no desire to rush you, but I also have no desire to pretend what I feel isn't real." The honesty of his statement moved Amara deeply. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, her lips finding his with newfound certainty. Unlike their first kiss in the courtyard, this one held no hesitation, only affirmation and growing hunger. Salvador's arms encircled her, drawing her against him with a strength that made her feel simultaneously protected and ignited. His kiss deepened, and Amara responded in kind, her hands moving to his shoulders, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath his work shirt. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Salvador rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that properly since I found you in the desert," he confessed. Amara laughed softly. "Even when I was covered in sand and green paste. Even then, his smile held such tenderness it made her heart ache. Though I prefer you like this. Alive with purpose, eyes clear, kissing me back." The moment stretched between them, perfect in its simplicity, until the sound of approaching footsteps caused them to step apart. Lucia appeared in the barn doorway, her expression apologetic. "Salvador, Mama needs you. Miguel just called from town. There's trouble." The seriousness in her voice dispelled the intimate atmosphere instantly. Salvador nodded, squeezing Amara's hand once before following his sister back to the house. In the kitchen, Esperanza was hanging up the old telephone, her face lined with concern. "Border Patrol detained Miguel," she explained as they entered. "They're questioning him about the family that was caught crossing." "On what grounds?" Salvador. "They claim one of the migrants identified him as a helper." Esperanza's voice was steady, despite her obvious distress. "It's nonsense, of course. Miguel was delivering supplies in Nogales that day." "I'll go," Salvador said, already reaching for his keys. "Where are they holding him?" "The checkpoint station. Luis Alvarez is already there. He's agreed to act as lawyer." Amara watched the family mobilize with practiced efficiency that spoke of having faced similar crises before. Lucia immediately went to call other family members, while Esperanza prepared a bag with food and clean clothes for Miguel. "I want to come with you," Amara told Salvador as he prepared to leave. He hesitated. "It might be better if you stay. Your presence could complicate things." "Or it could help," she countered. "I have connections. The university, my publication. American citizenship carries weight in these situations, whether it should or not." Salvador studied her, recognizing the determination in her stance. "This isn't your fight, Amara." "Yes, it is," she said firmly. "If it involves you, it involves me now. That's how this works." Something shifted in Salvador's expression. A recognition, perhaps, that their relationship had crossed another threshold. This wasn't just about attraction or growing affection. It was about standing together in difficult moments. "All right," he conceded, "but follow my lead. These situations can be unpredictable." The drive to the checkpoint station was tense, the night desert rushing past in shadows and silhouettes. Amara used the time to call her editor, briefly explaining the situation and requesting he stand by in case media pressure became necessary. Jack was reluctant but agreed to help if needed. A small victory in what promised to be a challenging night. What exactly does Miguel do for the ranch? Amara asked as they neared the station, gathering information that might prove useful. He manages our supply chain and sales, Salvador explained. Arranges buyers for our cattle, purchases, equipment, handles the business side while I oversee the land and livestock. So he's often in town dealing with various people. That's good, it establishes a pattern that explains his movements. Salvador glanced at her, a hint of admiration in his expression. You think like a strategist. I think like a journalist, Amara corrected, which means I look for narratives that make sense to authorities. As they pulled up to the checkpoint, a facility much larger and more forbidding than Amara had imagined, she reached for Salvador's hand. Whatever happens in there, she said quietly, remember I've seen both sides of the border now. I know which values matter more. Salvador's fingers tightened around hers. Then we face this together. The checkpoint station blazed with harsh fluorescent light, a stark island of institutional authority in the desert darkness. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Uniformed agents moved with practiced efficiency while civilian visitors waited in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces etched with varying degrees of worry and resignation. Amara followed Salvador to the front desk, where he spoke with controlled urgency to the agent on duty. His Spanish was rapid but clear enough for Amara to follow the essentials. He was requesting information about his brother, explaining that there must be a misunderstanding. The agent's expression remained impassive until Amara stepped forward, presenting her university credentials and press identification. I'm working on a border documentation project, she explained in deliberate English. Miguel Mendoza has been assisting with local historical context. His detention interferes with university research funded by a federal grant. It wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't entirely false either. The strategic invocation of official American interests had an immediate effect. The agent's demeanor shifted subtly as he made a phone call, speaking in low tones. 10 minutes later, they were directed to a small conference room where a familiar figure awaited them. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Mendoza, Agent Ramirez greeted them, looking unsurprised by their arrival. I was just about to call the ranch. Where's my brother? Salvador asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Being processed for release, Ramirez replied. The identification was mistaken. Security camera footage from Nogales confirms he was purchasing supplies at the time in question. Relief washed over Salvador's features, quickly replaced by controlled anger. This harassment needs to stop. It's not harassment, Salvador. It's procedure, Ramirez sighed. But in this case, overzealous procedure. I've spoken to the officers involved. Amara studied the interaction with newfound understanding. Ramirez wasn't just doing his job, he was navigating a delicate balance between official duties and personal ethics, much like Salvador himself, but from the opposite side of the equation. Thank you, she said simply, earning a surprised glance from both men. As they waited for Miguel's release, Amara quietly contacted her editor, informing him the situation was resolving without need for media involvement. His relief was palpable. Controversial border stories created complications the publication preferred to avoid. Miguel emerged 30 minutes later, tired but unharmed. The brothers embraced briefly, a rare public display of emotion that emphasized the strain of the evening. No apologies were offered by the authorities, just paperwork confirming the detention had been a case of mistaken identity. On the drive home, Miguel described his experience in measured tones that nevertheless revealed his anger. They're tightening everything, he explained. New policies, new surveillance. The unofficial tolerances that used to exist are disappearing. Salvador nodded grimly. It will get worse before it gets better. Perhaps we should reconsider certain activities, Miguel suggested, glancing meaningfully at his brother. Perhaps, Salvador agreed, his expression unreadable in the darkness of the truck cab. For now, the exchange confirmed what Amara had suspected. The Mendoza family was temporarily suspending their humanitarian efforts in light of increased scrutiny. A practical decision, but one that clearly pained them. The ranch was still awake when they returned, the kitchen light burning as Esperanza waited anxiously with Lucia. The reunion was emotional but brief, the family too practical to dwell on what might have been, focusing instead on moving forward. As the household finally settled for the night, Amara found Salvador on the porch, staring out at the desert with a glass of tequila in hand. You were remarkable tonight, he said as she joined him. That intervention at the front desk changed everything. Amara shrugged. I just used what privilege I have. American passport, university affiliation. They carry weight they shouldn't, but you used that weight for good. Salvador offered her his glass, which she accepted, taking a small sip of the smoky liquid. That matters. They sat in companionable silence for a while, passing the glass between them, until Salvador spoke again. Tonight made me realize something, he said quietly. The work my family does helping those in need, it's getting more dangerous, but also more necessary. He turned to face her. And I need to be honest with you about what that means for any future we might consider together. The directness of his statement both thrilled and sobered Amara. Tell me, she encouraged. A life here would never be simple, Salvador explained. There would always be risk, legal, physical, moments like tonight, decisions about where conscience and safety meet. His eyes held hers steadily. I would never ask you to choose that, especially after everything you've already endured. Amara considered his words carefully. What if I told you I've spent 2 years playing it safe since David died, taking no real risks with my heart, Keeping emotional barriers intact, she placed her hand over his. What if I said I'm tired of safety? Salvador's fingers interlaced with hers. I would say safety is overrated. But consequences are real. I know, Amara acknowledged. I'm not making decisions based on romantic impulse, Salvador. I've seen this place. These people, you clearly, with open eyes. Before he could respond, headlights appeared on the distant ranch road, an unusual occurrence at such a late hour. They both tensed until the vehicle came into view, a rental car. Melissa, Amara breathed, recognizing her sister's determined driving even at a distance. She wasn't supposed to arrive until next week. Salvador squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Then we welcome her now. Melissa Blackwood emerged from the car like a force of nature, petite but commanding, her movements precise and purposeful, where Amara had always been the dreamer, the artist. Melissa was the pragmatista, successful corporate attorney with a carefully ordered life. Amara, she called, rushing forward to embrace her sister with fierce protectiveness. Why weren't you answering your phone? I've been worried sick. Cell service is spotty out here, Amara explained, returning the hug. But I'm fine, Mel. Really fine. She stepped back, gesturing to Salvador. This is Salvador Mendoza. He's the one who found me in the desert. Salvador extended his hand. Welcome to Rancho Mendoza, Ms. Blackwood. We've prepared a room for you, though we expected you next week. I couldn't wait, Melissa admitted, sizing him up with unconcealed scrutiny. Not after what happened to my sister. The potential for awkwardness was diffused by Esperanza, who appeared in the doorway, somehow having prepared coffee and food despite the late hour. Her hospitality drew them all inside, where Melissa's sharp questions gradually softened in the face of the family's evident care for Amara over the next 3 days. Amara watched her sister's perception shift from suspicious outsider to reluctant admirer of the Mendoza family's resilience and principles. Melissa accompanied Amara on her photography expeditions, witnessing firsthand the project's evolution. These are different from your usual work, Melissa observed, reviewing images on Amara's laptop. More ... intimate. I'm not just passing through anymore, Amara explained, echoing her earlier words to Salvador. I care about what happens here, dots. Melissa's gaze was knowing. To the place or to the people? Both, Amara admitted, especially one person. Her sister sighed, closing the laptop. I came here expecting to rescue you, but you don't need rescuing, do you? No, Amara said gently. I was rescued already in more ways than one. On Melissa's final evening, as they sat in the courtyard with the Mendoza family sharing a meal under the stars, Amara made her announcement. I've submitted my completed project to the university, she said. They've accepted it with reservations about its personal nature, but acknowledgement of its artistic merit. She took a breath. I've also resigned from the Chicago apartment lease. I'm staying in Mexico for the foreseeable future. Silence greeted her words, broken finally by Esperanza. This is your home now, if you wish it. I do wish it, Amara confirmed, her eyes finding Salvador's across the table. There's more work to be done here, more stories to tell. Later, as the evening wound down, Melissa pulled her sister aside. Are you sure about this? It's a completely different life than anything you've known. Amara touched the turquoise bracelet on her wrist, now a permanent fixture. Remember what Mom always said? Home isn't a place, it's where you can be fully yourself. She smiled. I found that here. With Melissa's departure the next morning, a new chapter began. Amara's photography found an unexpected audience. A prestigious gallery in Phoenix offered to host an exhibition titled Borderlands, Beyond Politics, featuring images that captured the complex humanity of life between nations. The morning of the gallery opening, Salvador found Amara in their bedroom. She had moved to his quarters 2 months earlier, standing before the mirror with something glinting in her palm. David's ring, he observed quietly. Amara nodded. I'm giving it to Melissa today. She'll keep it safe. She met his eyes in the reflection. It's time. Single quotes. Salvador moved behind her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. Are you sure? More than sure. She turned to face him. David will always be part of my past, but you're my present, my future. Salvador reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple silver band inlaid with turquoise that matched her bracelet. I had this made in Nogales, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. If it's too soon, Amara silenced him with a kiss, then extended her hand, the left one, ring finger now bare of its previous band. It's exactly the right time. As Salvador slipped the ring onto her finger, Amara thought of the desert where she had nearly died, of the man who had found her when she was lost in more ways than one, of the family that had become hers, of borders crossed and barriers fallen. Some would call it chance that Salvador had happened upon her that day, that circumstances had aligned to bring them together. But Amara preferred Esperanza's explanation, God's mercy working through open hearts. In the harsh beauty of the borderlands, where life and death existed in precarious balance, Amara Blackwood had found not just survival, but revival. A new self, stronger for having been broken, more authentic for having been lost, more capable of love for having risked it again.